My name is Jim Varghese. I am the National Chair of the Australia-India Business Council, and I'm very delighted today that we can host, the Australia-India Business Council can host this post-budget review with the Honourable Michael Sukkar, the Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer. So before I commence the proceedings for this webinar, can I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we've gathered on today in every part of our nation here in Australia. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across our nation here in Australia. Before we move to the next speaker, I'd just like to briefly share with you the raison d'etre for the Australia-India Business Council. The AIBC was established in 1986 to foster bilateral relations between our two countries. We're the only premier non-profit organization with a mission to promote trade dialogue between India and Australia through nurturing and maintaining close relationships in both Australia and India. The AIBC is a national membership organisation with active chapters in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth and Canberra, and maintains close relationships with federal and state government agencies, the diplomatic corps and industry bodies, and showcases opportunities to the Australian business community and Indian business community through an active program of events. And this is one event today. India is a 2.59 trillion economy and will grow to be the third largest economy in the world by 2030. Trade between Australia and India has been more than doubled over the past decade, and the rate of growth will continue to rise as the two economies grow closer. And what better way to introduce today's session than to have the Victorian chapter of the AIBC, a very active and energetic chapter headed by a very, very powerful and energetic team, headed up by Ravneet, who is the President, Vice President Manjit, and of course, our very important patron Vasan, and we hear details of them later on in today's session. I'd like now to hand over to the Victorian President of the AIBC chapter. Over to you, Ravneet.
Thank you very much, Jim. It is an absolute pleasure for me on behalf of the Australia-India Business Council Victoria chapter to welcome you all and to host this webinar talking about the post-budget review. We live in difficult times, we live in strange times, but we live in times which promise a future, and especially a great future for Australia and India relationship. I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Minister, and also I'd like to thank our sponsors for actually making this event possible. It is an absolute pleasure for me to run what we're going to do in the next course of the hour. After I finish, I will hand it back to my moderator and the chair of AIBC, who will then be asking the sponsors to speak for a few minutes, after which we will ask our patron to introduce the Minister. Minister actually will speak about the post-budget review, followed by a Q&A by the moderator, and then a vote of thanks. So I hope you all enjoy this wonderful and engaging session, and I think this is going to be a very interesting one to hear it from the Minister himself. So I'd like to introduce our two sponsors. The first one is Martin Crevacia. He's the lawyer at Express & Co Lawyers, and also the youth chair of the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. And I think Express & Co help with commercial law matters, litigation, debt recovery, along with partner organizations providing professional accounting and financial services. Thank you to lawyer at Express & Co Lawyers for supporting this event. The next sponsor is basically, we will be looking at Gaurav Gupta from Ethical Property Investment. Gaurav and his family have been in Australia for over 30 years, originally from New Delhi. He believes that being a citizen of Australia comes with a responsibility. Fantastic, Gaurav. I totally agree with you. And through this journey, he is a director of 6 companies, 2 of which are social enterprises. So fantastic work you're doing and supporting people. Thank you so much for supporting this webinar. I'd now like to hand over to the moderator and the national chair.
Thank you, Ravneet, for that very comprehensive introduction. So without further ado, I'll call on Martin to speak from Express and Company Lawyers. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Martin Krivoshi. I'm from Express & Co Lawyers. We really are honoured to be sponsoring tonight's event. And on behalf of the Express team, I would like to thank the AIBC for tonight's post-budget webinar. For more than 12 years, Express has been helping clients with a range of civil law matters. We've experience in commercial litigation and debt recovery, while also assisting with professional accounting and financial services through our partner organisation. Ties between Australia and India and its businesses alike have never been stronger, and we're proud to be able to support the AIBC and this post-budget webinar. Director and founder of Express & Co Lawyers, Gary Kisoglu, is a well-known community leader, having developed and led a number of initiatives within the local community, as well as on a broader state and federal level. On behalf of Gary and the entire Express team, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to all the attendees here tonight, along with our esteemed guest and keynote speaker, the Honourable Michael Sukkar. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Martin. And now I'd like to ask Gaurav from Ethical Property Investment to speak to us. Over to you, Gaurav.
Hi, my name's Gaurav, and I'm the Director of Ethical Property Investments. And our mission is to raise the commonwealth of this country, whether it be financial or social. And over to the next slide, if we can. So I'm going to be talking really briefly around why now is the right time to invest in ethical property strategies. If we head over to the next slide. Look, in Australia, we currently have a housing crisis. Our homelessness amongst older women grew by 31% in the last 5 years. And the statistics show that right now there's more than 300,000 women at the age of 55 or above who have significant risk of homelessness when they retire, if not before. And at the same time, there's over 6,000 young people living in nursing homes and growing. Thanks, Michelle. Next slide. Look, most Aussies invest, in a negatively geared property where they purchase it for 700,000, might rent it out for 420 a week. And at the same time, we've got those challenges before. So what we did at Ethical Property Investments is that we created a unique strategy, which we've been pioneering in the industry. And if you have a look at the next slide, you'll see that we're well endorsed by a few notable faces, as you can see on the images, for doing what we do and helping create win-win outcomes, not just for a social cause, but also to make it profitable as well. I believe that you can achieve both, social outcomes as well as a profitable outcome. So if you have I've got a couple of examples really quickly. If you head over to the next slide, I'll show you this particular kind of house, which generates 8.8% gross yield for an investor in Melbourne, actually houses people just like Tracy who are on the verge of homelessness, and we're preventing them from approaching homelessness and being able to make money at the same time. If you head over to the next slide, we'll have a look at, this is how we can, an example of how we help people with special needs and disabilities get quality housing and move them away from nursing homes into something that really helps them change their lives. Now, if you've got any further questions on the next page, you'll see that now's the right time to do good and make money. And that's why I really want to be involved in this whole process with both Michael and AIBC and the team. My details are below. Feel free to contact me if this is something you feel like you wanted to know more about.
Thanks very much for that, Gaurav. It's now my pleasure to introduce the AIBC Victoria Patron, we are very fortunate to have Vasan Srinivasan. He's an extraordinarily talented, highly experienced, but also very busy person, and he's found the time to agree to be our patron in Victoria. So over to you, Vasan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my privilege and pleasure to introduce my local member, Honorable Michael Sukkar, Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer. He was elected to a federal parliament representing our seat of Deakin in the 2013 federal election. He has lived and worked and been a part of Deakin electorate for his whole life. He's passionate about the local community and understands the issues that concern our residents. Let me say this, I'm a personal friend of Minister Sukkar. We work very closely in relation to Indian community in the southeastern suburbs, not only southeastern suburb, entire Victoria. He was instrumental in assisting us in preparing 108-bed aged care beds for the benefit of Indian community in Victoria. Not only that, he was instrumental through Prime Minister Morrison to get $4.8 million to continue to construct that aged care. That doesn't stop there. Currently, after last election, he assisted us to secure $2.5 million to construct an Indian community center of Indians, first home for Indians in Victoria. Currently, we are working out to buying a property in Rowell. Without Michael, it's very difficult for us to achieve this. Go on. He has assisted us in giving us quite a lot of funding for the Punjabi schools in Blackburn, as well as Ramakrishna Mission, Vedanta Society in his own electorate. So why I'm saying few of this, he's very passionate in supporting the Indian community. I can call him as a brother. I can reach him out for the benefit of this community. He's always there to assist us. Thank you, Minister Michael Sukkar, for joining us today.
Well, Vasan, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I am very lucky to call you a friend, and likewise. So, can I thank you so much for everything that you do on behalf of the community, not just in Victoria but throughout our country, and I see up close your tireless efforts and the sacrifices that you make on behalf of others. So, Vasan, thank you so much. Can I thank your National Chair, Jim? Thank you for your opening remarks and, of course, for the invitation today. Again, it's a great honour for me to be able to join the Australian India Business Council. Can I commend and thank you for the work that you all do. You know, I do keep a reasonably close eye on the work you do, and we're very grateful. Of course, your Vice President, Ravneet, who spoke earlier, wonderful to be here with you. And of course, to the sponsors, thank you. Without you, it wouldn't be possible to make it happen. Well, I suppose in commencing my address this evening, the Australian budget last week was the culmination of course, a lot of work, but in many respects, it was just a continuation of the fiscal support that has been put in place throughout the year. We've seen, following the budget, total fiscal support, direct and indirect, from the federal government of $507 billion, some 25.6% of GDP. And we started out the year in March with our first economic assistance package that dovetailed into a second and a third package. And of course, it culminated with the budget. To put it all into some context, which I know I don't need to do for the benefit of this audience, but I think it's always good to touch on it, is the fact that this is the most exceptional and difficult economic period in 100 years, and the best comparison point for most of us in our own lives is to compare it to the global financial crisis in 2009. The difference being that in 2009, during the GFC, the global economy contracted by 0.1%. Yes, it was devastating, but we saw a contraction of 0.1%. This year, the OECD expects that there will be a contraction in the economy of 4.5%. So what we are dealing with now is 45 times worse in magnitude on a global scale than what was quite a devastating event in the global financial crisis. In dealing with it, we have focused as a government at first instance to cushion the blow to Australians. We were unable to, of course, stop the blow from happening, but we were very focused on cushioning the blow. And as I said, our economic support packages all the way back to March, whether it was household assistance in the form of cash payments, whether it was the cash flow boost, more than $30 billion to support small businesses with grants of up to $100,000, whether it was the coronavirus supplement and job seeker payments, an additional, at that time, $550 a fortnight payments, whether it was the access and early release of superannuation, which has seen tens of billions of dollars of people's own money being accessed for support, which then led to the JobKeeper program, a $101 billion program, which has supported 3.5 million employees, over 1 million businesses throughout the country. All of that was designed to cushion the blow and to try and maintain as much productive capacity in the economy as we could. We knew a lot of businesses, otherwise healthy and strong businesses, profitable businesses, would suffer severe financial harm as a result of the pandemic. And so we're very focused on ensuring that as many of them as possible could survive, make it to the other side in a condition that would allow them to take advantage of the opportunities into the future. That's critically important. That strategy has seemed to have worked, although it's cold comfort to say it in the midst of this very difficult time. We saw GDP shrink by 7% to the June quarter in Australia. When you compare that to New Zealand by 12%, the US by 14%, the UK by more than 20%. So whilst a devastating result, certainly by comparison, we fared a little bit better, and indeed a lot better than some others. And that's something that I think will again ensure that we're even stronger on the other side. Last week was therefore focusing, moving to that next step from cushioning the blow and supporting households and businesses to actually then providing them the opportunities that they needed in order to grow, to invest, and to get back on their feet. And there's a number of things that we announced in the budget that will be of interest to members of the AIBC. Of course, for most of Australians, the most important aspect of the budget will have been the accelerated tax cuts, the bringing forward of the stage 2 tax cuts, which will mean 11 million Australians will receive tax cut, a personal income tax cut. Dual income families at the lower end of the income scale will receive and be better off by about $5,500 a year for dual income families, or about $2,750 a year for individuals. That is a tax cut plus the lower middle income tax offset, which we've extended for an additional year. That, of course, is going to put more liquidity into the economy, more money into the economy. The part of those tax reductions flow through to people's paychecks over the next few weeks as the tax tables are updated, and that's going to make a difference for people. But really the focus of the budget was about how do we empower and support and incentivise businesses to invest and to keep going. And we know so many businesses will need that little bit of encouragement and support and facilitation from the federal government. So we've done a range of things there. We put in place a hiring credit focused on employees aged between the ages of 16 to 35. So an employer who employs someone who's been on job seeker between 16 and 29 will receive a $200 a week wage subsidy from the government, or a credit from the government. And for somebody between the ages of 30 and 35, a $100 a week subsidy. We expect that will support 450,000 jobs in the economy, because we know that in times like this, people with relatively less work experience are the ones who suffer the most as far as being unemployed. And as we've also seen from previous recessions, where you have jobs being lost, they get lost quite quickly, and it takes a number of years for them to come back, and often that's disproportionately impacts younger Australians. We've also put in place some significant measures to support business. We see ourselves as a government as facilitating the private sector, which employs 8 out of 10 Australians. Rather than seeing the government in the centre of the economy, the government should facilitate the innovative, the entrepreneurial private sector. And that's what we've done through a few measures. We've introduced a measure, an instant expensing measure, which now means that any depreciable assets purchased by businesses with a turnover of less than $5 billion, so essentially 99% of Australian businesses, can instantly write off any capital depreciable asset they purchase rather than writing it off for many years. Now that helps with cash flow. We think it's going to fill the order books around the country. So for trucking businesses, they'll be able to write off that new truck. For a cafe, they'll be able to write off the new coffee machine. For a manufacturing business, they'll be able to write off that plant and equipment that will provide, no doubt, an immediate economic stimulus, but also longer term productivity benefits too to the economy. As we know, those investments invariably improve productivity. We've also, accompanying that measure, put in place a loss carryback measure, which basically means for healthy, strong businesses who have been in good shape and have been paying tax and have been profitable up until the pandemic, will be able to offset losses, tax losses that they make this year and next, and retrospectively place them against tax that they've paid in the 18-19 income year onwards, which effectively will give them a refund of tax that they've paid in the past. As many of you would know, when you accrue tax losses, they're only of benefit to you in the future if you meet 2 hurdles. Firstly, your business has got to survive, and secondly, you've got to make a profit in the future, and therefore you can offset the losses. So the net present value of those losses might not be particularly great, and in many instances you might have to wait many years. So we'll see Australian businesses taking advantage of that and getting refunds from the tax office immediately following lodgement of their tax returns for taxes paid in prior years. And that, I think, is going to provide additional capital for those businesses to take advantage of the first measure I spoke about, which is the instant asset write-off for depreciable assets. So they work very much together. We've also made a range of other investments. We're putting an additional $2 billion to increase the R&D tax concession, again, utilising the tax system to encourage investment in research and development, and some more systemic measures that really get the economy going. One of them we announced prior to the budget, which was to abolish or to remove the responsible lending obligations which were put in during the global financial crisis. There's been such a restriction and a tightening of credit, both for individuals and businesses, and a lot of that comes down to the responsible lending obligations, which go into 100 pages, where banks in effect are very risk averse because they can be held accountable for somebody who borrows too much. And so the consequence of that is that the banks protect themselves by lending less. And we know that credit is the lifeblood of the economy. And if credit's not flowing freely, then it's very, very difficult to have an economy that's growing robustly. So we are going to abolish the responsible lending rules. There will still be protections for consumers, but in the end, responsibility will be on people who want to borrow money. And banks have got it in their interests, of course, to only lend money to people who they think can repay it. But we want that to be a commercial decision between a lender and a borrower without a whole lot of red tape in the middle. And we also have announced and will soon be putting in place changes to insolvency rules to mean rather than people losing control of their businesses when they get into distress, we're borrowing some of the best parts of the US Chapter 11 rules, which basically allow a business owner to undertake the restructure get agreement from their creditors where their debts are less than $1 million, to keep control of their business and to continue to trade out of that distress situation that they are in. So again, you know, an important measure that I think many businesses are going to take advantage of, particularly many very, very profitable businesses in the past, sound businesses that have been hurt. I might leave it there. I think there's probably a lot of detail that might be interesting to specific members of today's forum, but I mean, really, I just want to emphasise that we see the government's role now as facilitating the private sector to you know, to have that confidence, to invest, to grow, and to employ their fellow Australians. We want to absolutely assist that process, but we don't want to get in the way of it. And I think you've all seen that we're not shy to throw a lot of fiscal support at ensuring our economy remains strong. And we will continue to do what needs to be done in order to make sure we get through this pandemic, both from a health, but of course an economic perspective, in good shape. So again, thank you so much for having me. Can I commend the wonderful work you're doing, and thank everybody again for being on this call. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Michael, for a very, very comprehensive speech, which really highlighted some of the key points that our audience are very interested in. So let me kick off the first question from our audience, and that's from Gopi from Global Victoria, who has asked, can you please dwell on the updates to the R&D incentive?
Yes, certainly I can. So in essence, in the investment we've made, the additional $2 billion, we're increasing the refundable tax offset to 18.5% above the relevant claimant's tax rate, and there'll be no $4 million refund. There'll be no $4 million cap on the annual cash refunds. We're going to streamline the intensity test from 3 to 2 tiers. Many of you would have known the draft rules that were there. And in essence, we will have an 8.5% above your tax rate refund for lower intensity, 16.5% for higher intensity, and the eligible R&D cap will go from $100 to $150 million. We're expecting that these changes will apply from the 1st of July 2021. Well, they will. They've been introduced and been passed. In essence, what we want to do is encourage those businesses who have a greater intensity of spending around R&D through providing that additional refund, the 16.5%, and we want to weigh as much of the additional benefit to smaller businesses as well, smaller Australian businesses who are undertaking R&D. So I think by any measure, and I think most of the feedback I've got has been that it's been very welcomed, and we hope that that will spur even more investment into the important intellectual property which creates so much wealth and prosperity for the country.
Thank you. That is actually very encouraging business news. Can I take the next question from Kiran from the Angoras Group? And he would like to ask, and I'm sure you've heard this question before, in terms of a free trade agreement between Australia and India, when is it going to happen? Any timelines?
That's sort of like the $1 million question, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think one of the interesting observations, and I've spoken to my good friend Vasan about this on a number of occasions. One of the interesting outcomes of the pandemic is, I think, an appreciation that we need to, in many ways, diversify our supply chains. I think there were many businesses who were caught short when the pandemic first hit because there was an over-reliance on particular jurisdictions for their supply chain. And one of the wonderful things that has done is, I think, refocused some energy and effort towards our relationship with India, because that's a natural place for us to to rebalance some of those very important supply chains, in addition to perhaps bringing back some of that capability to Australia, particularly having a local capability in critically important areas. So, so that's a long-winded way of saying that we're very focused on it. I know the Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, it's sort of on his bucket list, I suppose, as a Trade Minister. It's the holy grail, really, to land that free trade agreement. I think my understanding is, and I can't profess to have an intimate insight, but my instinct is it's moving in the right direction, although perhaps not moving as fast as many of us on this call would like. And I think it's probably still at that trajectory. Jim?
Thank you for that. And Kieran has asked a supplementary question. He said, what can we expect in this most difficult times for business owners? The global pandemic and recession period for the next couple of years? What roles can we play between Australia and India, between Victoria and India?
Yeah, well, look, we are expecting a bounce back next year, growth back to 4.25%. Now, admittedly, that will just be regaining some of the ground we lost this year. So we're hopeful that these measures that we've put in place are going to see some buoyancy. Clearly, there's going to be a role, though, for your members to facilitate greater trade with India, and we're going to need to diversify that. I mean, we've seen just today some additional tensions in relation to, or pronouncements out of China in relation to Australian coal. So there's, I suppose, a greater sense of urgency, and I think what we need you to do is to speed up wherever possible and within the constraints that COVID-19 places on us, particularly from a travel perspective, but to try and bring forward some of those plans that I know are the longer term objectives of the AIBC. And, there's no time like the essence. And I think leading by example in that way also pushes and motivates the government to do the same.
Thank you for that. And to a slightly different angle now from Jim, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Mental Health Foundation Australia. He says that according to some sources, as many as 50% of our young people are experiencing mental health issues due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Although the government is providing additional resources to some organisations to address this problem, how can we be sure services required are in fact being delivered? And secondly, might some organisations be overlooked who are carrying much of the load?
Well, thanks for the question, Jim. I mean, there's no doubt we're putting huge resources into the mental health consequences of this pandemic. And I suspect, and this is my own personal view, but I suspect in time the mental health consequences may dwarf the consequences that have directly been caused by COVID-19, particularly in places like Victoria, where I was speaking to somebody yesterday who lives in Footscray, which was a hotspot for a period of time. And so she has been in lockdown every day since the 27th of March, other than 3 days. So she's had 3 days of relative freedom since the 27th of March. Every other day since then, she's been at home for between 22 to 23 hours. So I think there's no doubt there's a huge call. There's organisations, I know Jim's organisation, Vasan, the Mental Health Foundation, that is carrying so much of a load on its own back in supporting those people. And rest assured, Jim, I'm very conscious to ensure that organisations like yours that are doing that work freely and voluntarily and without government assistance should be the first in the queue for that assistance, and we're certainly working on that.
That's very encouraging answer. Our next question is from Dr. Prayers. She's the Managing Director of ProSquare Solutions. And what she'd like to know are what are the opportunities? Just excuse the dog on the side. What are the opportunities for more collaboration in recycling projects within India with the recent announcement?
Thank you, Jim. Well, obviously we've made in our manufacturing strategy a number of areas where we want to place particular focus. One of those is in recycling, and if I understood the question correctly, you know, it's a priority area, and I think there's certainly opportunities where either Australia has developed decent technology, or probably more likely where we're able to utilise good technology and good experience that's been developed in India to try and develop our own sovereign capability. We have relied for many years on, in most cases, sending our recycling offshore, and that's got to change. We've decided and we've mandated that in fact we need to develop our own sovereign capability in recycling. So for organisations like that, I think you're in a very good position, whether it's traditional recycling, whether it's recycling waste to energy, whatever it might be, given that it's a specific objective of our manufacturing strategy, those sorts of ties with India will be best placed, and you know, I'd be very happy to facilitate that.
Thank you for that. I'm sure Dr. Priya would appreciate that, particularly in relation to recycling projects that we can collaborate with. The next question is from Atom from AI Commodities. Is there anything specifically in the budget for the grain exporters from Australia?
The grain exporters, well, again, as part of our energy strategy, which looks at firming up renewables through gas, which is a very important way to transition to renewable energy. And again, I know of many instances and examples where Australian businesses have successfully taken developed technology here into other parts of the world. Now, India might be one of those. It's certainly got a thirst for energy, and it's certainly got a thirst for ensuring that its industry is able to transition to a cleaner economy as well. So, no doubt there are solid opportunities there. What role the government will play in facilitating it is a bit harder for me to know. It's a slightly more mature area of Australian market, and there are some more established players. But you know, again, it's a priority area of assistance, and DFAT, I'm sure, will be very keen to facilitate through our offices in India in any way, shape, and form.
Thank you for that. And our chair of Make in India VIC has asked the question on what are the implications on the international trade and supply chain with the new budget measures?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. So we remain resolutely determined to continue being an open trading nation. We think that there are great risks that in difficult economic times like this, that nations retreat into themselves, and in the end that will mean we're all a bit poorer and less prosperous. So that's really the first point. There is no doubt going to be particularly in response to our manufacturing strategy, a move to not only diversify supply chains, but to ensure that there are areas of critical manufacturing that occur in Australia. So we have sovereign capability. Now, what does that do for trade? Well, I think in first instance, it means in order to develop those, where we don't have developed expertise, we need to source that. And so if there are areas that within those within the strategy that you believe, any of you that are involved, believe that there is a way in which our counterparts in India can help speed up our own capacity, our own capability, well, that will provide short-term opportunities. But I think the broader thing will be probably a movement from supply chains that are solely based in China to being much more diversified, and India will need to pick up the slack there for Australian businesses. And the reason why that's the case is, again, to go back to what I said earlier, many businesses were caught short, not because of anything that improper that their Chinese counterparts did, but when the virus hit Wuhan and in effect the country went into lockdown, those supply chains stopped overnight in their tracks. And when you don't have that diversification, it crippled many businesses here in Australia. So again, we've got to have that diversity. So when there's a problem or an issue with one jurisdiction, we can rely on another. And I think India is, along with a couple of other countries, is a natural place for that diversification. But specific budget context, I think the immediate opportunities will be around trying to help Australian industry up to speed in developing that sovereign capability in the areas that we've demonstrated or that we've decided need to have that additional assistance.
Thanks very much for that. Our next question is from Richard from Stockman Wines. And his question is, with the economic carnage happening in Victoria due to the state government, how does this hinder the good federal government initiatives, bearing in mind Victoria makes 1/4 of the Australian economy?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt Victoria's second wave that came out of the hotel quarantine disasters has had a significant impact. 7 out of the 8 states and territories are operating in a relatively COVID-safe way and with their economies reasonably open. And Richard, you're right. Victoria is an economic powerhouse. We're 25% of the national economy, and when Victoria is not going well, it's a big drag on the rest of the country. There's no doubt about it. And not just Victoria, but Victoria is the gateway for so many businesses. It's the gateway for product and for trade, and so it's definitely inhibited businesses in other states who rely on Victorian businesses as part of their own supply chain. So it's had a huge effect. In our budget, we have put in place different assumptions depending on what may happen. And one of them says if there's another Victorian wave or another second wave like Victoria somewhere in the country, that it's likely to cost the economy $55 billion. Now, that's an assumption we hope never comes true, but it just shows you the magnitude of these sorts of lockdowns, what they do for the economy and the handbrake they put on economic growth. So we are, really hopeful that Victoria in particular can learn some of the lessons of the past and can also try and put in place some of the really good contact tracing systems that seem to work very well in New South Wales. Very interesting, in the last couple of weeks, there's been a couple of days where there were more new cases in New South Wales on that particular day than Victoria. And yet New South Wales is open and functioning and operating in a reasonably normal way. I was in Sydney yesterday. Almost, yes, a COVID safe, but an almost normal existence compared to Victoria. And a lot of that is because of their contact tracing capability. And so I'm very hopeful, Richard, that the Victorian government can take some of the lessons and perhaps try and put in place the best practice that's been undertaken in New South Wales that will enable us to open up in a COVID safe way. And that will then have significant economic benefits along the way.
I'll take the last question. We've got some 8 questions in our Q&A. We'll take the last ones, and we'll certainly answer those questions after the webinar. The question is from Tony Domenico, and his question is, what initiatives are there for the construction industry and housing in particular?
Well, Tony, thank you for your question. And Tony's another great friend of mine and a great Australian who's who has served our nation very well. Tony, look, we've obviously placed at the centre in many respects of the recovery the very important construction industry that employs directly and indirectly up to 1 million Australians. And as Housing Minister, we've done a few things. Firstly, prior to the budget, we announced the Home Builder Program, a $25,000 grant for people who purchase new homes, an incentive for people to purchase new homes because once the pandemic hit, there was no doubt that the residential construction industry was going to fall off a cliff and threaten many, many hundreds of thousands of jobs. So the Home Builder Program, through these grants, has seen new home sales jump by 49.8% over the first 4 months of the scheme. In fact, we've now got higher new home sales over the last 4 months since Home Builder was put in place than any time over the last 2 years. So even pre-pandemic, it's in better shape than pre-pandemic. I also announced, as part of the budget lead-up, an expansion of the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme. In essence, this scheme allows people to purchase a new home, or their first home, I should say, with a deposit of as little as 5%. At present, the First Home Loan Deposit Scheme is open to any house, so an established property or a new property. But as part of the budget, we announced an additional 10,000 places under the scheme, with one additional condition that you purchase a new house, not an established property, a new house. Again, to drive construction in the industry, and those 10,000 places will be, I'm sure, eagerly taken up between now and 30 June. Again, what does it do? It drives jobs. Core logic tells us that for every new home that's built, that supports 43 jobs. And it's not just the tradies on site, it's the people who design them and market them and sell them, all the way through to the timber mill workers who cut the trees down and make the frames and the trusses. So there's a huge supply chain into the industry, and it's a critically important part of the Australian economy. So we have put in a lot of effort to support it, and we'll continue to do so. So thanks for the question, Tony.
Excellent and very comprehensive. So appreciation for all of us here at the AIBC. I'd like now, as we move to close this webinar, ask my colleagues to give me 3 words, 3 takeaway words that sums up this webinar for them. So let me start with the patron of the Victorian chapter of the AIBC. Vasan, what are your 3 words?
Thank you. My 3-word, Minister knows quite well. When are we traveling to India?
Okay. Any take-home words for his budget presentation and the answers? 3 words for you.
It's an amazing budget. I'm quite impressed the way Morrison government has created an opportunity for us to proceed further during this difficult time. Excellent job done by Michael Sukkar and the team.
Thank you. Ravneet, your 3 words?
Well, my 3 words are comprehensive, cohesive, and collaborative. I think
Very
that it's an amazing budget and very, very, well, supportive, totally supportive.
Okay. Martin, your 3 words?
Yes, I had optimistic, comprehensive, and considered.
Goro?
Visionary, powerful, and future-oriented.
And Manjit, your 3 words?
Thank you. I go with the ABC of the budget, the asset write-off, business concessions, and personal tax cut. That's what I go for, the ABC.
And Minister, can I provocatively ask you, what are those 3 words for you that really make this budget what it is?
Well, Jim, you've caught me on the hop. I thought you were just requiring it from everybody else. Look, I think you know, to steal Martin, I think optimistic is one. I think we're absolutely optimistic, and the budget lays that out. Empowering, I think we want to empower the private sector and private enterprise. We don't want government at the centre of everyone's lives. We want to facilitate and empower it, and of course confident. You know, I'm confident about the future of Australia. I'm confident about humanity in general being able to deal with these challenges. Like many, if not all of you, you know, I look at my family and the challenges that led them to provide me the wonderful opportunities here in Australia, and I have phenomenal respect for my forebears, as I have great respect for your forebears in the challenges that they had to deal with in their lives. And as a generation, we're so fortunate compared to the trials and tribulations that they went through. And I think this is a great opportunity to see if we're worthy of the sacrifices that they made for us, because now is the time for us to dig deep and to provide our children and grandchildren, to go back to the golden rule, to gift them a society that is better than the one that we got handed to us. And I think that's what our forefathers would want us to do. So I'm sorry, I know that's many more than 3 words, Jim, but I think as all of us from a migrant background would say, I feel that quite heavily. I feel that I feel that obligation to do, you know, to do my forebears proud. And there are few communities in our country, in fact, probably none, that do that better than the Australian Indian communities. I know I'm speaking to people who are thinking the same way.
Thank you. Actually, that's very inspiring. And I think that really summed up for all of us, I think, the very importance of this budget. I mean, for me, I like the fiscal, I use the word fiscal approach is good. The reminder that this is 45 times worse than we've ever had. And the initiatives like JobKeeper, you know, the accelerated tax cuts, incentivization, JobSeeker. Look, they're all great initiatives and will resuscitate the Australian economy and, of course, that important Australia-India relationship to help the economy grow on both sides. And on that note, I'll ask the AIBC Vice President, Manjit Singh, to deliver a word of thanks. Manjit, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Hello, everyone. Namaste. Normally I would be the one behind the scenes with my team, but thank you, Minister. Thank you very much. What an insight, much needed. And with special thanks to our sponsors today, Goro and Martin. Please do contact them and do mention AIBC for further benefits. And thank you, Jim, our National Chair, for leading AIBC so well nationally and even in the past national and state elections within our AIBC, and moderating our important events all the time. Ravneet, our Victorian President, you surely bring great energy, and along with our dear patron Vasan, who is very well known to the community in every space, especially political space. And super thanks to Wendy, Karishma, and Vishal, and our entire Victorian Management Committee for all the support. I would like to say here that we really want to acknowledge our existing AIBC members and for all the support we have from you. And also to those who wish to join AIBC, we now have a very streamlined process online, aibc.org.au. Please do visit and do join. And there are many benefits there for you. And for today's event, this is all will be, you can recap on our social media, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and kindly do share it as much you can. And we do have our upcoming events. And thanks, Vishal, for the screen. The next one is October 22nd, which is the AIBC WA Meet and Greet networking event. More details again will be on all our social media. And there you go, another one, thank you, the healthcare webinar, which is on the 12th of November. So do save the date for that. All the details, like I said, are available on our social media, and we look forward to it. And I'm so glad the team is so proactive. Till yesterday, this wasn't even confirmed. So 16th of November, another great event with Honorable Alex Hawke, the Minister for International Development and the Pacific Assistant Defense Minister. So look, you've seen today's event, how valuable it is. And these new upcoming events will also be highlighting their individual topics. So look forward to you again engaging with you all. So thank you very much. And over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Manjit, for that vote of thanks. And as we also congratulate all of the participants that we finish on our golden rule on time, which is very good and very encouraging. And can I just remind you that this event has been live streamed on Facebook, and the recording will be kept on Facebook and YouTube as well. So share it, encourage membership of the AIBC, and thank you again, Honourable Minister Michael Sukkar. On that note, I will say good evening, thank you, and namaste.
Thank you, Michael. Bye-bye.